Two here and two
Good
here.
afternoon.
Just floors first.
Yeah.
We can have your attention, please. Welcome to the October 2023 meeting of the Houston County Historical Society. We will call the meeting to order. Please make sure you sign in on our sign-in sheet. Silence your phones. We'll have the Pledge of Allegiance led by Miss Linda Smith. To the right.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. For the meeting minutes, are there any questions or corrections? Good job, Melissa.
I was looking for the lows to see if they got there today.
Oh, okay. If there are no corrections, the minutes stand approved. Treasurer's report, Leah.
We had income of $152 and expenses of just over $500. So we currently have $1,887.86 in the bank. Our CD got $108.37 for 3 months interest. So we've got $10,595.26. We also have a balance left in, we had allocated money and we received some donations for the World War II program. So we have a World War II balance that is unspent, and we don't have any more expenses of $260.80. So I'm going to return that to our balance.
Are there any more outstanding bills for the World War II?
Nope. So,
Any more questions for Leah? Is there a motion to accept the report? David, second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you, Leah. Well, I've got old business and new business mixed together because kind of the World War II is old, but it's new as well. We have maps and prints and books available. Melissa was real good about listing what we had in our minutes that may need to be updated. I think we are out of prints now. Maps, sorry. We're out of maps. If you find someone that wants a map, a cemetery map, we can get some, but we really didn't want to ask them to do 1 or 2 at a time. So if we can get up to 5, they would probably print those for us without any problem whatsoever. So if you find anybody that wants one, tell them that we possibly could get that going for them. It's October, and that means new officers or renewing officers for 2024. I've asked Jackie Bateman to be on the nominating committee. We will ask another person to help her with that. If you know of anybody that wants any position or be thinking about returning in your same position. Marissa, do you have an update for the archives? That'd be great.
Okay, last time I gave y'all an update, it had been a couple, 2 or 3 months, so there was a lot to talk about. This time it's just a month, so we still have quite a bit to talk about. Normally what I do is I talk about what's been donated, and now that we have this ability, I can take pictures and I can show you what we got. So, one of the first ones I want you to show is a portrait.
Lights
Sure,
up.
yeah. It'll be about 5 minutes.
Wow, that's dark.
Good.
No, it's okay, go ahead. This portrait was donated to us by Sue Dennis, who had gotten it from Miss Emily Moore. Miss Emily Moore is a history high school teacher. And I tried to get a picture without any glare. It was almost impossible because it's one of those photos, it's curved. So, this belongs to Louise Lanick. And Emily seems to think that it's one of her grandparents because there's no name on the picture. So it's either Denard Waynick and Elizabeth Bailey, Thomas Halliburton and Rebecca Boaz, or William Adkins and Letitia Slayton. I seem to think, because there were some photographs online, I seem to think that this couple is Denard Waynick and Elizabeth Bailey, but I can't conclusively say that. But this is a very large, it stands about this tall, portrait. So very wonderful portrait, again, nothing written on the back. But we were grateful to get it. She had, Miss Emily Moore gave it to Sue Dennis, because she's part of the Atkins Waynick family, and she said that if you can figure out who it is, keep it, it's yours. And if you can't figure out who it is, then donate it to the archives. And so she brought it to us. She said, we can't figure out who this is. So she brought it to us. So we were grateful to have that. Before I go to the next donation, the first thing I wanted to say was the November meeting we're going to have in November is going to be a very special meeting, and I hope everybody comes. It's going to be in the Archives and Museum, like we do every November. But we're going to celebrate the 40th anniversary of our Historical Society. In November of 1983, a group of people got together and formed the Houston County Historical Society. So we're going to celebrate that night. We're going to have food that night, so the time will be earlier at 6 o'clock. But if you have any memories, if any of you were there when they started the Historical Society, or if you have any memorabilia to share, bring that with you. So bring your stories, bring memorabilia, photographs, or anything that you might have to share, because we're going to celebrate our 40th anniversary. That's what I wanted to say first. So that's the portrait. Next is, many of us know that recently Mr. Joe Meacham passed away. I did not know him personally, but many in this room knew him at different levels and different scenarios. His wife Joanne's still living. About a week ago, their son Carrie Meacham came into the archives and donated a book and said that my mom wants you to have this book, and then he proceeds to tell me that they're cleaning out the house. I don't know the background of why they're cleaning out the house, what's going on, but so I said, okay. So I handed him one of my flyers that talks about what we accept as donations and things like that. He said, oh, thank you very much. The next day, he came in with boxes. I think he was very grateful to find someplace to bring some stuff. And then the next day, he brought more boxes. And then today, he brought more boxes. And they haven't even cleaned out the attic yet. So I wanted to share with you some of the things that he brought. He brought maps. Evidently, and like I said, someone here might be able to shed some light on it. Joe and Joanne Meacham were very much involved in the historical community and the Historical Society. So these are some maps. He also told me something very interesting, that Joe Meacham was into fishing. He loved fishing. And one of the things that he would do, and he said that a lot of people who fish do this. We all know that the town of Danville was flooded by the TVA in 1943 to create Kentucky Lake. He says that while all the buildings are gone, he says that the foundations of these buildings are still there. And these people that go out and fish, they use their, and I'm horrible at this, their GPS, their sonar, or whatever it is that they use, and they locate those foundations, and that's where they fish. So what made my mind go off was, wouldn't it be neat if we could map the bottom of Kentucky Lake and map some of those foundations? Anyway, so he gave us some maps. He gave us cookbooks. These are Joanne's cookbooks. Now Joanne's living, so they're cleaning out the house. So she gave us, and a lot of these cookbooks are local, churches and things like that. And amongst those cookbooks were these. And these are like new, but old, copies of these cookbooks. So I brought them. I thought, I don't need them. So I thought I would sell them for $5 a piece and add that money to our artifact budget. This is the one from Isham and Josephine King Allsbrooks, the descendants. It was compiled by their descendants. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 6 of those. This one is called Come and Dine. It is the Aaron Church of the Nazarene, 1898 to 1998. And so it has all of our local people and their recipes in them. And so I'm sure they sold for much more at the time. But if you want one of these cookbooks, I thought I would sell them for $5 and put the money in our artifact budget. So cookbooks, we got those. Here's another picture of the cookbooks. She had this wonderful cookbook thing. It was like, almost like a scrapbook type thing, but she put her own recipe cards in these, kind of like photographs. And so those are really, really neat to have. Also, she donated a lot of Allsbrooks family stuff. And among the stuff are some records, a record book actually, on Allsbrooks family reunions. Now, here is a picture of the book. Again, glare. But these records started in 1926 and go to 1946. I thought that was pretty interesting. And it's like every time they met, they updated births, marriages, deaths, all kinds of stuff. So we have this notebook. The first page in it, I don't know if you can see it, but it's dated 1926. And then I look in the back and it goes to 1946. So pretty neat. But today, Kerry came again with a box. And he came in real quick and says, I got more stuff, laid down the box and left. When I opened the box, it was a large box, about like this, and it was filled to the rim with old newspapers. And I said, oh, you've gotten into the attic. And he says, nope, this was out on the back porch. I said, okay. So we have newspapers. Here's the box. And that's one picture. Looks like Joe liked to put all his newspapers in plastic bags, which actually was pretty great. Not the best, but it's actually kept it nice. And so today, knowing I was coming tonight, I wanted to go through these because the majority of these newspapers was the Houston County Times. And some of you that know about our newspapers knows that the Houston County Times, we don't have a whole lot of those issues. And a lot of them weren't even microfilmed at the state level. So I went through these and cataloged as fast as I could. We now have, between the time of 1934 and 1950, over 150 new issues of the Houston County Times. So my heart skipped a beat when I started seeing, when I opened this box and I started going through it, and there were almost all the Houston County Times. Yeah, we were able to add to our catalog big time. So that's all I've got. Leah, you want to change up the...
Yeah, I got it.
But again, search your attic, search your, closets, basements, garages. You have old newspapers. I'm really trying hard to collect every issue of the Houston County Times, and this donation has gotten us a lot closer. There are some years that we have every issue, and so I'm just very excited. And if you want a cookbook, I'm going to sell them for $5. We're going to use that money to buy stuff off of eBay whenever we find it.
I forgot to mention too that the Houston County elected officials gave us a plaque in honoring our World War II endeavors. To the Houston County Historical Society, thank you for honoring our local World War II veterans, dated August 19th, 2023. There was a lot of hard work that went into that, and we will continue to work on that. We'll continue to take donations and information and uniforms and whatever else you want, but this was from the Houston County elected officials. I'm going to introduce our speaker.
Oh, you want me to?
Okay.
He needs no introduction. We are so glad to have Graham Perry here tonight. You are with the Tennessee Historical Commission.
Yes, not the society.
I know, I
work
wanted to
for
make
them
sure,
too.
I wanted to make sure I had that
I
correct.
work at both places.
On a tip from Deborah Stanfield, who had, did you actually see him in Dixon or here?
Probably.
No, I saw in the newspaper he
Okay,
had spoken to the DAR,
okay.
front page news.
So I will give you a little introduction on Mr. Perry. He joined the staff of the Tennessee Historical Commission in 2019 to develop the newly created Tennessee Historical Cemetery Preservation Program. Previously, he served as curator of social history at the Tennessee State Museum, creating exhibits that include We Shall Not Be Moved, 50th Anniversary of Tennessee's Civil Rights Sit-ins in 2010, Tennessee's Intentional Communities, examining the farm, Neshoba, Rugby, and Ruskin in 2014, I Have a Voice, African American Music in Tennessee in 2017, State of Mind, Tennessee's Musical Heritage in 2018, and the permanent display, Tennessee Transforms 1945 to the Present in 2018. Perry holds a BA from Belmont University, an MA in African American History from the University of Memphis, an MA in Education from Christian Brothers University, and has completed PhD coursework at the University of Memphis. And with that, I'll bring Mr. Perry up.
Sounds more impressive than it really is.
Go that way.
Oh, do I need to?
Yeah.
If you want, oh,
I want the lights off or on? I want the lights off or on?
As long as I can see, I
We
guess
don't have
bring
it
it
up
up
yet.
and let me see what
Oh,
I can
sorry.
see.
There you go.
Okay. and then do
Do I need me to move it so you can see it?
the-
well, if you, could you all hear him?
Yeah.
You can go anywhere you want.
Oh, okay, good, because I am loud. I was born that way. So, I did start the Tennessee's Historic Cemetery Program back 4 years ago. And I've actually been developing it myself because I had no idea what to do. I did get in contact with I have some really good contacts in Arkansas and North Carolina, and they kind of helped me get off the ground. But, you know, really, I'm kind of feeling out what I can do and what is the most valuable things for me to do. I mean, there's so much to do with cemeteries, as you can imagine. With 95 counties throughout the state, I mean, it's overwhelming, it could be overwhelming. So, one of my jobs is not only I've been doing a database, but I've also been studying cemetery law in Tennessee, because what I found very quickly is that most people in Tennessee only know parts of the law, if they know any of the law at all. And because of that, Tennessee's had a history of a lot of damage and things like that to cemeteries. So I figured that that would be a good thing for me to jump on. I also do site visits. I try not to do every one because in the database so far I've got 36,000 cemeteries, and I don't want to make 36,000 trips across the state. So I really try to pick and choose carefully where I go and for what reason. And I am a one-man show, that's it. I don't have a secretary or anything. But this has been really exciting. And when I walked into the job, I was like, wow, cemeteries. Who would have ever thought I would have been a cemetery guy? And from the day I walked in there, when I had to deal with the desecration down in Murfreesboro, I really understood that knowing cemetery law is very important, and to be able to help educate people throughout the state on it. Now, I will tell you this. I am not an attorney. I have to tell you that as a disclaimer. I have talked to our TDEC attorneys about a lot of this stuff, and some of the Tennessee laws are so vague, maybe, I guess is a word for it, that honestly, if you have a better lawyer than I do, you'll probably win. But that's for you and the attorneys to decide. Okay, so, if you will, please. So, Tennessee law overview, and I have this really nice picture of William Blackstone there, and there's a reason. I'll show you in a little bit. And also the Constitution. The strong points of Tennessee law is we actually have a Family Graves Burial Grounds Protection Act, which is TCA 46A. TCA 46 is the entire cemetery law, and it's very, very, very long and deals mostly with commercial cemeteries. However, so we look at an historical cemetery to the Tennessee Historical Commission is 50 years old or older. However, a lot of cemeteries that are commercial and things like that are still being used are also historic. So my job I have like a foot in sort of modern cemeteries as well. In fact, I talk to the Rob Gribble all the time, who's like the funerary, I forget what they have a really long name, but it's the state funerary people. So he and I contact each other all the time. Now, the thing about the Family Burial Grounds Protection Act, it's in there, but many don't read it before taking action, and many don't know that it ever existed. Which is why in 2018, the legislature decided to pass a law that said that there had to be a cemetery committee formed, and as a result, my position was formed. And the cemetery committee, their whole job is to study Tennessee cemetery law to figure out how we can make changes and streamline it so it's not so confusing for people. I'm not a part of the committee, however, I do write the papers and stuff, so. And I always am reminded they are a committee, not a commission, so they do not rule me. But I have very good people on it. I mean, the state archaeologist is on there among many other people, and they've all been very helpful. So another strong point is the relocation process is clear. That actually was established after World War II, probably because of the post-war boom. I have no idea, I haven't gone into that research yet, but I'm sure that there was a lot of potential development going on. And it's the biggest problem with the relocation process, it has changed over time a little bit, and non-compliance can sometimes be worth the risk, which is why people sometimes accidentally destroy cemeteries. And so one of my jobs is to make sure, oh wow, did you do it accidentally or did you do it on purpose? And I'm very committed to finding that out. Tax incentives exist, but they're really tiny. In fact, they can be really confusing because there are some laws with property assessors that we could talk about. They're supposed to identify cemeteries that are of historic value, and they're supposed to report it to Tennessee Historical Commission. But guess what? Nobody told us that. So it's because I accidentally read the statute that I was like, oh my gosh, we're supposed to be involved in this. So I talk to property assessors all the time now. Another thing that property assessors do, they're supposed to set aside as a tax-exempt separate plat any cemetery that's a quarter acre or bigger. That's state law. Well, the problem is, and what I have discovered is over the years they have done that, but rather than saying, oh, we took this out of so-and-so's land, they just set aside the cemetery and say it owns itself. And if you go and look at all the property data things, you'll see so many cemeteries that just say, they don't have an owner, it just says, Smith Cemetery. Well, what I'm trying to do with the property assessors is I'm trying to make sure that, hey, you know, when people are getting these things set aside as tax-exempt plats, you still need to say that they're the owner of the cemetery, because then they can make some reasonable rules for it, because it's on their land. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. The desecration law is clear. Problem is it's in Tennessee Code Annotated 46-1-313, which only applies to commercial cemeteries. Huh? So what's desecration then? Well, I don't know. If you look at some other places where it kind of describes it, but a lot of people look at that and say, well, that's the desecration law, but it's not really. It says that all other cemeteries but the commercial ones are exempt from it. Go figure. Also, we have problems with enforcement from time to time. Most law enforcement agencies do what they're supposed to do, but there is a lot of confusion. A lot of times they haven't done a lot of cemetery you know, investigation work, and they don't know exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And so a lot of times, because cemeteries seem so, oh, you know, not as important to some people as others, they just say, oh, that's a civilian matter. Well, no, it's a criminal code. Desecration is, so we'll talk about that. And so I have to kindly remind people, oh yes, you have to go out and you have to file a report. The criminal penalties are spelled out in TCA 39, Chapter 17. Well, of course, the problem with that is they're not in TCA 46. So you actually have to go search for them in the criminal penalties to see what the penalties actually are. Then we have a precedent called Hines versus Tennessee, 1911. It strengthened the law. Tennessee cemetery law was initially passed in 1911, and then this court case ensued. And it sets precedent not only in Tennessee, but across the United States. It's number one. Tennessee's number one. We have the precedent. The biggest problem with it is visitation is not actually in Title 46. It is actually in Hines. And so what happens is people say, well, that was passed in 1911. That doesn't count. Yes, it does. It counts. It doesn't matter if it was passed in 1911. There's not like a time limit on precedents if they're still being used. Next. So, TCA 46. Like I said, there are a lot of other chapters of this, but the two that I most commonly deal with are 46.4 and 46A. 46.4 is termination of use of land as a cemetery. What 101 says is that a person that wants to terminate a cemetery has to prove that a cemetery is abandoned, neglected, or threatened. Not all three, but one, just one of those. 102, it defines interested persons, and generally speaking, it's families. It does not say descendants, it's families. Why do they do that? Because some people don't have children, and so their cousins have to take over cemeteries. And we know how hard it is for people to have the gumption to go clean up cemeteries, especially 36,000 across the state. So I think that that's probably why they defined it that way. Don't know historically, but it makes sense. 103 describes the process for termination that you have to go through. It's very stringent. You can't just like, well, maybe I'll just do this. No, it doesn't work that way, and I'll talk about that in a minute. 104 then says what the provisions for reinterment are, and we will talk about that as well. It's like, how is it supposed to take place? So TCA 46A is the Family Burial Grounds Protection Act. 103 states, and it actually has at the very beginning, the intent of the act is to inform landowners that they have the duty to protect the cemetery that is on their property or inside their property. 103A, it also says that a known cemetery must be on a deed of transfer. One of the reasons why cemeteries have gotten lost over the years is because over the past many, many decades, people haven't put them on, there might be somebody in 1859 that said, this cemetery, I've set aside this 1 acre for a cemetery, and then it never appears on a deed again. So as you can imagine, then they can get lost. 103B, it actually defines that there is a protection boundary around a cemetery that must be adhered to by landowners and other people. 103C says, if you don't like this law, see TCA 46.4. Next. So, 46.1. This is where everything is spelled out really well, but it only applies to commercial cemeteries. Why? I don't know. 46.102, the definition of a cemetery, and it's the only place that it's defined in state law. But remember, it doesn't count for any other cemetery, right? Because it says that they're exempt from this particular, which is crazy. So I'm trying to get them to make sure that they define what a cemetery is where it's not exempt. But they haven't done that yet, they haven't picked it up. It defines it as any land or structure in this state dedicated to and used, and here's a big one, or intended to be used for interment of human remains. One grave in Tennessee equals a cemetery. Not the same in other states. I think Arkansas, you gotta have more than 4, and I don't know what they call 4 and under. A cemetery can even have no graves. Intention of use is all that is needed. And there's actually a court case that we'll talk about later that actually does set a precedent for family cemeteries. And we'll see that in a little bit. Cemetery purposes, and I love reading these things, how lawyers write stuff. Any and all things requisite or necessary for, or incident or convenient to the establishment, maintenance, management, operation, improvement, and conduct of a cemetery. The preparation of the premises for interment and the interment of the human dead, that's key. And care, preservation, and embellishment of cemetery property. But again, it only applies to the commercial cemeteries because they exempted everything else. So, what is it for everything else? Well, we'll see. All right, so 46.4, this was the earlier law that ended up resulting in the Family Burial Ground Protection Act. So I go to this one first. 101 defines the purpose of the act. You have to ask the question, or the landowner has to prove to the circuit court that a cemetery is abandoned or neglected, or the purpose of the property surrounding a cemetery is inconsistent with proper reverence for the dead. Only one of those things you have to prove. Now, how do you prove something's abandoned? What does abandoned mean? They don't define it.
Not cared for?
Maybe. See, we actually have in our office, if a cemetery hasn't, or even a house, has not been visited by anybody within 50 years, it's abandoned. Well, how can you prove that somebody hasn't been there in 50 years? Well, it's a good question, and that's why I collect everything that people send me. So abandoned is really difficult to prove, I would think. Neglected, you can prove they're neglected. One of the problems with this is Mother Nature likes to pick up things really quickly. There are people that, oh, this cemetery is neglected. It hadn't been, it's been overgrown for 40 years. And I'm like, no, those trees right there, those are new growth. It's probably been a year. So, there are ways to look at things like that. So proper reverence for the dead. And I always say, there are people out there that say a cemetery should never be moved, including one of the people that's on our cemetery committee, that they should never be moved. They should always be there forever and eternity. But the thing is if your forever and eternity is in the middle of an apartment complex, right smack dab in a foyer or something where everybody's playing, maybe that's not the best place for that cemetery. Because they are going, if they petition to build these apartments and a planning commission says it's okay, then they're going to build there whether that cemetery is there or not. It's the question of are they going to keep the cemetery there or are they going to relocate it? Sometimes relocation is best for it. Anyway, interested parties, 102. It can be family members, relatives, and anyone having a right of easement. There's a court case that we'll talk about later on that says county officials do have the right of easement. What county officials, I don't know. I guess it depends county by county. But, because I've had talks with Murphy, for some reason Rutherford County does not let their property assessors go on property without permission. And that's ridiculous. No other county does that. It's been a thing, because people say, well, we can't go on there to see what's going on because we're not allowed to go on there. I'm like, why not? Every other county is allowed to go do that and see what's going on that property. I've even had policemen say, oh, well, that's private property, I can't go on there. And I've had to say, oh, okay, so if I have a house and my next door neighbor is killing his wife, and I call the police, y'all can't step on the property because it's private property, I don't think that's the law. I think they just don't want those. 103, actions and proceedings. I always say this is even if you clean a cemetery, even if you visit a cemetery, check to see if you really own the cemetery, and if not, finds out who's owned it. And that can be a trick, and I can help with that. But the thing is you may not own that cemetery, and it may make a difference if you're a landowner and you're trying to move it. Step 2, the complainant must first publish the notice of intent to relocate the cemetery using press sources common to the county. This has also come up for debate now too, because now that there's internet and when they wrote this law, there were only newspapers, and so what counts? If you have a good enough lawyer, I guess they can tell you. All I know is this, probably what won't be covered is if you take a flyer and just put it in one place in the record store. That's not going to work. So you have to prove due diligence that you're trying to inform people that you're going to relocate the cemetery. Step 3, the county chancery court must then be contacted to petition for termination, and the remaining interested parties or family members are considered defendants. Here's the deal. See, what has happened before I got here? People have been like, oh yeah, well, we couldn't find any defendants at all. We didn't know any family members, so they make the cases John Doe's or Jane Doe's. Well, there's a little place in the Tennessee state law that says if you do a Jane Doe or a John Doe case, if you're an attorney, you have to prove that you have done due diligence to try to find who these people are before you can make that declaration. And I've caught somebody doing that before, and he got in a lot of trouble. He didn't like me for a while too, but that's okay. I don't have to be liked. I don't like everybody equally, so I don't need any new friends. I like them, and it's great to have them, but if you're mad at me, it's not really my deal. So that has to happen. And interestingly enough, so the petition must be filed with the Tennessee Historical Commission. That's us, it's in the law, and it has to be posted on our website. I put the petition on there. Most people give me the petition and a letter of notice, but it's either the petition or the letter of notice. But either way, I read them all. I don't have to. There's nothing in the law that says I have to, but by gosh, I'm protecting cemeteries. So I'm just going to make sure that they read correctly. And I do contact attorneys if something's off. They don't have to like it. I don't care about that part. 464104, judgments and decrees, termination and removal. Well, the circuit court determines the outcome of this whole process based on evidence tied to 464101. If you prove any one of these things and the circuit court says you've proved it, then they can okay the relocation. And they have to issue a final order. And in those final orders it says where the bodies have to be removed to, and it's very detailed.
Who pays for it?
Landowner. Landowner is allowed to relocate things at his or her expense. And just because family members are notified doesn't mean that the family members are going to win. So, but by informing family members, and I've had this successfully work in Tennessee, sometimes the people that want to relocate the cemetery and the family members can come up with ways that kind of make everybody happy for the relocation. And that's why the family members really need to be notified. Now, family members can be mean and awful, and so can landowners. But the fact of the matter is getting people together for a dialogue to try to figure out the best way to do it, in my book, is probably the best way to do things. Next. 46.8, the Family Burial Grounds Protection Act. And I think Steve McDaniel pioneered this. Matter of fact, he's a good guy. I've seen him down recently. 101. It tells what the purpose of this law is. It is intended to provide notice to buyers of property with known burial grounds and grave sites that this law applies. 468102, it defines what a crypt is, and it just defines what a gravesite is. It doesn't say what a cemetery is, though. It also determines that it applies to human remains, not animal remains. Although, if you look at our map on the Tennessee, I put pet cemeteries in there anyway, just because it's, I don't know. And actually, TDEC was excited that I did that for some reason. I'm not sure why. But yeah, you can bulldoze all the pet cemeteries you want to. And you're not gonna, I mean, there's gonna be people that are gonna be mad. Just letting you know. But you can't bulldoze these. Not with human remains. And that includes prehistoric human remains. To remove a prehistoric Native American grave, you have to go through the termination process just like any other grave. So TCA 103, or 8103, it says that a landowner has a duty to protect graves or crypt and that disturbances are prohibited, and if you don't like it, you can transfer the remains or petition to. A cemetery owner has the duty to protect known graves. Now the problem is it doesn't define what duty to protect means. So, if you're a landowner and you've got a cemetery on your property, what's the duty to protect? Well, let me just give you some ideas. First of all, you know, if kids are going in there and drinking beer, the landowner has, he is more than welcome to call, he or she, to call the police and get them thrown out. But one of the other things that has happened time and time and time again over the years and years, which is actually illegal, is running livestock through a cemetery with no fence. Now, a landowner does not have to do anything for the family or anything to a cemetery. He can just let it overgrow or do whatever they want to do. But they can't run livestock through it. And trust me, I'm working with some of that right now, and people are like, well, we've always run cows through. I'm like, yeah, well, not anymore. So I take those calls and I pursue them. Because cows will tear up a cemetery quickly. The other thing to think about too is if a cemetery is a tax-exempt plat and you're using commercial cattle to graze in a tax-exempt plat, you're breaking the tax law. And cemeteries are considered 70 exempt, which means they're a religious exemption. That's very important to remember. An owner must ensure a cemetery is on a deed prior to sale or transfer. So if you give your cemetery to your kids, make sure it's on the deed when you transfer the deed to them. It defines a prohibited area. It's 10 feet from a grave and 5 feet from a crypt. Those aren't very earth-shattering distances. Most developers will leave a 30-foot one or something like that because they just don't want to take any chances. Some, however, will leave none, and those I get onto. And, we go to the planning commissions and say, why did this developer do this? Blah, blah, blah. How are you going to rectify it? And again, I have no power, but I've spent the last 4 years knowing people that do. Just call them up. I love it. So, it also notifies an owner that there is an option and a process for removal. See TCA 46.4. Okay. Ooh, I can snap my fingers. TCA 39.17.3. This is the criminal offenses that have to do with cemeteries. And there's actually another one that I don't have on here. I've seen them prosecute for vandalism as well. And I probably need to add that. But the ones that directly mention cemeteries are 39.17.3.11, desecration of honored places or flags. So as far as a cemetery, a person may not desecrate a place of worship or burial. What is desecration? Well, it's defined in that 46.1, but it doesn't apply to any cemeteries but commercial. So now it becomes interpretation. Well, is that really desecration? To me, to our office, when anybody's moving headstones or whatever, I mean, even if it's a family member that because I have to tell you some really great stories about family members fighting about moving headstones. But we look at it as the way our office defines things, and it's not law, but we highly suggest instead of replacing a headstone, leave the headstone there and then just make a new one and then put it there and let the other one disintegrate. That, from the historical perspective, that's what we say. It's not law though. Which, so if one family member, say that y'all are family, and she wants to replace an old marker of y'all's ancestor with another one, and she can just go in there and do that because she's family and she's beautifying the graves or doing whatever it is she's doing. Because the families technically own the headstones. Okay? Now you'll get mad and you'll call me up and say so-and-so moved a headstone, and I will tell you, in this case it is a civil matter. And what I usually suggest in cases like this is mediation. But I don't get involved in it because I would be doing this forever. But I will help any way I can. We've got a situation in Nashville that's been going on for years. You're gonna love this, man, oh my gosh. So, when they wrote the historic book where they did a cemetery survey back in 1980, they identified that these two cemeteries were on pieces of property. But instead of like putting, exactly where they were located, they said, oh, and one of them is north of the driveway. Well, okay, so do driveways change? Maybe. Oh yeah, it's by the old oak tree. Well, the old oak tree died 30 years ago. Where was it? I don't know, because it's not there. So what ended up happening, one of the guys, and the guy may have been partially right, but one of the family members who actually owned the property around it, and it was a separate tax-exempt plat on the Metro map, he wanted to terminate that cemetery so he could sell it with part of his property. And his reasoning was there weren't really graves there. But there were two, box tombs, and there was an obelisk. Well, here's what's funny. So, and we have lists at our place of actual archaeology companies that will do the right thing. So if somebody says, oh yeah, we used a construction engineer company to come out and see if we need graves, and they said there weren't. Well, I'll never accept that. If somebody calls me into court, which they've done that before, I'm going to say, they're not on our accepted list. I don't accept that. Because I know what a report's supposed to look like. Now, can I interpret a report? No, that's why I get my friends in archaeology to do that. But they know what they're looking for, and a report that tells you how many graves are in a cemetery or whatever is very extensive and there's many pages. It's not just one page to say, yep, we went out there, nope, there's no graves. And that's the sheet of paper and that's the report. I ain't supporting that one. And so in this particular case, and this is what's funny, the one family member decided, as a family member, that since there were no graves there, of course actually he was just trying to sell the thing to make money, but that he would just move all the tombstones to another cemetery. Well, and then he got somebody to one of these cheap companies to say that there were no graves there. Well, the funny thing is, in his mind, he said he had heard from his father or something that there were no graves there, they just put the markers. Well, he might be right, because guess what? When I went out there to go visit, and I was like walking by this place, I said, there's Vinca right there. That looks like where the cemetery is. And on the Metro map, they had identified where the markers were. So guess what? Now that there are two cemeteries right near each other, one that hasn't been identified and one that has, on the north side of the road. So now you have a problem with, you're trying to terminate this cemetery, but you still have this cemetery over here that's not even recognized, that when they start plowing stuff up, they're going to have to stop construction. So they are still in the middle of this big giant court case. And I do think that, matter of fact, the other family member that was mad that he moved the markers, I asked him, I said, when do you think those were, I said, when did your ancestor die? And he was like, oh, early 1850s. I was like, well, how long do you think that those tops to that box tomb have been there? Oh, they put them there when they died. I was like, well, they're sandblasted. They didn't start sandblasting until the 1870s. Which means that this person was in the ground a long time before anybody came and marked his grave. And let me tell you, I've seen it with, sometimes with older people that don't remember where a grave is. They'll think a grave is somewhere. I'll give you a prime example. Oh my gosh, Judge Haywood. For years, they petitioned, City Cemetery and Jeff Sellers over at the museum, very good people. They were upset because, he was right next to a gas station. And the church that was on the other side was like, man, y'all really need to move this guy because he's only on this much section and we can use that section. So it became this big thing that they wanted to find out where Judge Haywood's grave was. Well, here's what happened. There had not been a tombstone until the early 1900s. So a person put the tombstone, here lies Judge Hayes, and that tombstone is actually at the Tennessee State Museum. I've seen it, it's back on the shelves. But what happened in the 1950s is, and this is the only thing, the only monument the Tennessee Historical Commission owns for some reason, but the DAR and Tennessee Historical Commission, they decided that they wanted to put a huge obelisk. So they took that one out and they gave it to the museum, put it in the museum collection, and then they put this big huge obelisk there, and it says on it precisely how many paces it is to Judge Haywood's grave and in what direction, based on where that original cemetery stone was. Well, guess what? We had, was it TRC or was it New South? I don't remember. Anyway, the big thing, I was right there. They peeled the entire top of the ground off and there was no grave. So what had happened is somebody didn't know where he was buried, but they thought they remembered it. And then, of course, some DAR's like, yes, and he's here! That's not where he was. And they think he's under the parking lot of the church. That's a different section, but a different thing. So anyway, you can see how it can be confusing. And people's memories aren't always as good as they remember that they were. So TCA 3917, oh, by the way, desecration is a Class E felony in Tennessee. It is not a misdemeanor. It used to be a misdemeanor, but it is not. It is a felony. TCA 3917-312 talks about corpse abuse. And it is also a Class E felony. Prison time from 1 to 6 years and a fine of up to $3,000. And don't forget, with a Class E felony, you lose the right to vote. I always like to remember. So if you're really adamant about voting, don't do this because I will make sure that you can't. Because felony, felony, felony. Okay. We just don't, I didn't grow up in a family where we all just did what we want to all the time. My dad was an Army colonel and was in World War II, and that's not how my family was. So I don't understand the rugged individualism that doesn't take in mind other people. I don't understand that. That is not how I was brought up. Okay, so, go ahead. I had to think. So what to do if you see desecration, or you see what is believed to be desecration, report it to the local police immediately. Contact the county court to notify them that there's desecration going on. And these entities must uphold Tennessee law. You don't have to be a family member to report desecration. I can report it if I see it. And I have, and once the police department said, oh yeah, well we already filed a report, and they didn't, and I remember that. And whenever that police department calls me up again for help, I'm going to remember that they did that to me. But they must uphold Tennessee law. If they refuse, call the regional DA and notify me. And all the DAs so far, I've worked with just about all of them, and they all do what they're supposed to. If the regional DA doesn't act, call me and I'll call the Attorney General's office. Because it's the Tennessee law, it's not just, well, maybe it's not a law. Let's not do it today. That's all right, those guys over there are doing drugs and stuff like that. We won't worry about them, but we'll arrest those ones. It's that same kind of thought. Corpse abuse, accidental disinterment. Well, if you're like mowing your grass, if you're like bulldozing or you're plowing or whatever and you see bones turn up, you have to stop by law. Otherwise you are corpse abusing. Now, sometimes they're not human bones. I mean, I sort of know what human bones look like because I used to be a friend of Jeanette Rudy's and she used to take me to archaeology things all the time. And the Department of Archaeology can definitely tell you. Sometimes people will call about bones and they'll send somebody out and it's pig bones or something, and I get that. But the thing is, a developer, if they turn up a grave or something, they're supposed to stop work immediately. They're supposed to call the police and the health department immediately. They don't just like, oh, a couple of weeks from now, maybe, well, no, that's not the way it works. Remember, you might have just found a murder victim. Don't be an accessory to a crime. Anyway, I'll call the Department of, and I don't think this is actually law, but they highly suggest you call the Department of Archaeology because they can come out and identify and see what you've got there. If you see intentional disinterment, call police immediately. And man, call me because I'll be all over it. Next. So, well, here's funny. TCA 685508. Why did I have to find that in a whole nother place? Well, this is the health department's code. So I found 685508A, authorization for disinterment and reinterment in cases of movement of cemeteries or parts of cemeteries, or for reuniting families shall be required prior to disinterment of a dead body, and I think the most recent addition was or fetus. So, that means the health department has to approve it. Now, the funny thing is, I'm not sure that what you're supposed to do, you're supposed to call your local health department and then they contact the Tennessee Health Department, and I'm not exactly sure what they do, but there's a form that has to be filled out. Such authorization shall be issued by the state registrar to a licensed funeral director or person acting as such. What is a person acting as such? It wasn't defined, but we think it's archaeology companies. Not Joe Bubba with a backhoe, okay? We're talking about licensed people upon proper application. So, we suggest, you can use funeral homes for any of them. There's not a law that says you have to use either one. I mean, well, you have to use one or not the other, but funeral homes you can use for any grave, but we suggest highly that you use them for graves after 1920s, because archaeological companies, you'd be surprised how little is left of a grave. And sometimes the relocation is symbolic more than anything else. Which, you know, people think that there's just skeletons lying everywhere, and there aren't. Matter of fact, we had, oh my God, I was watching when they were doing the TVA relocation, and they had these perfectly archaeologized skeletons there, but when they were bagging them up and they had to have a bag for each bone so that they could put it back in the proper grave when they relocated it, and when they took the bones out, it was like soup. So they were just putting goo in a bag. You couldn't keep them right. There was no way. Okay, now archaeology companies you can use for any grave. Now, they'll probably be more expensive. I don't know what the funeral homes charge. Okay, next. So, we have this nice precedent, Walter Hines versus State of Tennessee. It sets the precedent in Tennessee and all across the nation. There are lots of court cases that cite this one first. It's not completely included in Tennessee code yet, although there are parts of it that do, especially with the cemetery's got to be on a deed was in there in another form. It defines interested party rights. An interested party, and we're talking again family members, have the right to maintain, repair, and beautify their cemetery. Now, what is beautification? Well, I don't know. I had somebody call me up and said that the other family member wasn't putting the right kind of flowers in the cemetery. I don't concern myself with that. She's like, well, you know what the right flowers are. I'm like, well, yeah, mostly I see vinca. Is that what you're talking about? No! Yeah, that's between y'all. Whatever kind of flowers you want. It also says that a family member has the right of visitation, and they can even cross, it's from the nearest road in a reasonable manner and at reasonable times. Now, it doesn't say what those are, but I've had like landowners where they didn't want people visiting, so what they did is they said, well, we're not allowing them to come through through the nearest road anymore. We're going to make them come from the back. And of course, the road was like really, really messed up, and 80-year-old people couldn't get up there, and so they had to not do that. There is an implied easement, and it doesn't necessarily pertain to a particular location on the property. So that's why I always tell family members and landowners, I always tell a landowner, you've got to let them on there. But what I would do is I would work stuff out with them so that they don't drive through your crops. You know, it's got to be reasonable.
Good common sense.
Yes, common sense. But they also have the right of burial in a family cemetery. And guess what? All these things right here are perpetual. Till the end of time. It also declares a cemetery is a cemetery forever. And then, of course, but then they passed 46.4, which means that's the only way you can make a cemetery not a cemetery anymore. A landowner cannot obstruct interested party visitation. Now, again, when family members call up and they're like, well, I didn't call the landowner. I was like, well, of course he pulled a gun on you then. He didn't know you're a family member. It's like you need to talk to him, and and if he's a curmudgeon, don't worry, I'll deal with him. I put this picture up there because that was something that happened in Cheatham County before I got here, where this landowner, and I won't say it's a race thing, but it is. He didn't want the African American people to come visit their family cemetery, and that was definitely illegal. And Alan Brown worked on that, and I always tell people right now, if the landowner constantly blocks you, you constantly call the police and get police escort every time, because eventually he's going to get sick of it. And I don't think I hope he's not going to shoot the cops. A landowner can also not desecrate. This also means plowing up headstones and using the land for something else. The way Tennessee law works, according to how our former attorney who retired and I, after talking about it, the way we think that it's interpreted is a person can own a cemetery, a person or an entity, but the headstones are always owned by the families because they're seen as having been purchased, even though some of them are just rocks in the ground. And then the graves are owned by no one, which is why you have to have a petition to relocate them, even if you're a family member. And guess what you have to do as a family member if you want to move Grandpa? Well, you have to advertise it, and then the other family members can come and tell you why you can't move Grandpa. Okay, next. So here's some other relevant precedents that apply. And look, one of them's in Tennessee. So Davis versus May from Texas, and these all referred to the Hines decision. It confirmed the right of ingress and egress for interested parties. McCoy versus Barr in 2012 in Kansas, it said that county employees are granted easement to maintain a cemetery if they want to. Wayne County has they're the only county that I know in Tennessee that is maintaining every cemetery. And they're I'm still keeping an eye out, but they're very dedicated. They got the entire county government working on it and everything like that. And of course, I've had landowners that get mad, but why are they on our property? I'm like, well, because they can. Sorry, dude. Rhodes versus Nicholas, Missouri, 1981. It said that, I love this one, this is great. Relatives are granted the right to restrain an owner from interfering with a cemetery's purpose. So, if I want to bury somebody in my family cemetery and the owner comes out with a gun, I can call the cops and get him freaking arrested and put in jail, and I can go ahead with the burial. Because by the right, I have the right of perpetual burial in my family cemetery. Stoker versus Brown, Tennessee, 1979. I have looked at this over and over. Man, it's like a 26-page decision. But what it basically means is a declared cemetery, if it's declared acreage, it remains a cemetery. It's the same size as it ever was, even though somehow it miraculously shrank. And the reason why I say that is because I know that farmers will be like, well, I'll just take a little off this way. My father-in-law's cemetery on his land is like that. There's 19 people buried there, and I'm looking at the thing. I was like, yeah, well, those 19 people are not just buried in that little area. They're all around. But this case actually said that this cemetery was declared, it was an acre big, and it stayed an acre. And there may not have even been people buried in it, outside the fence. Because in many cemeteries, when you see a fence, that's not where everybody's buried. That's where some people are buried. So it's really confusing. Okay, so next. So why can't I plow up a cemetery? It's my land! Well, first of all, it might not really be yours. Call the Register of Deeds and confirm. Even if it is yours, you still must leave it alone by the Family Burial Grounds Protection Act. There is a legal process for relocation, as we've talked about, and if the rules make you angry, blame English common law, because that's where American cemetery law derived from. And guess what? Do you know where English common law derived from for cemeteries? From Roman law. So we've been talking about customary laws that have been going back thousands of years. They're just now codified. Also, you can blame the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution because since a cemetery is a religious entity, it's a First Amendment right. I've actually told some attorneys about this sometimes, and they were like, they hadn't thought about it. I'm like, yeah, it's First Amendment, man. You can't be doing that stuff. And Tennessee law, actually, there's a Tennessee law that specifically mentions this. And also, blame yourself for purchasing the land before you knew the law. Let the buyer beware. That's the capitalist motto, right? Okay, figure out stuff. I have people that are going to buy lands with cemeteries on it. They call my office to ask me about it, and I tell them what the laws are, and they can decide whether they want to buy the property or not. Okay, next. What should I do if I'm a landowner? Why, follow the law. If you don't, you're going to lose. It's expensive and will take up your limited time on earth. I'm going to give you all a really good example. And my father-in-law, bless his heart, he was a good guy. He was a judge in Arkansas, and people knew him all over the place. But he got Alzheimer's, and of course, with that, you start acting erratic. People act differently all the time with Alzheimer's, but he was acting erratic, and he was prone to being mad and things like that. And so what ended up happening is his other daughter, my sister-in-law, who is a firecracker, we'll just put it that way, she was mad because this other person was using the road that connected their farms to go down and park his truck there so they could go deer hunting. Well, of course he did, it's his property. But what had happened is my father-in-law at one time, the county had closed the road, and I'm sure that there was no writing or anything. I'm sure that the guy down at the thing says, okay, Bob, it's your road now. Well, that's not the way law works, okay? You don't just go, yep, it's yours, and then and everybody recognizes it now. So what ended up happening? There was still a farm on this road, and these people wanted access to their own land, and it had been a county road. So they basically, whether the road was on Bob's property or not, they had an implied easement. And we kept trying to tell the family that, don't do this, you're gonna lose. They spent $25,000 getting the survey redone to prove that that road was on my father-in-law's land, and guess what they found out? It was on the other person's land. So just work stuff out. It's not worth it. Also, be nice. Visitors may be annoying, and I know some that have been, but try to work something out if they request access, because it is their right. Don't just do what you want and hope no one finds out, because if you do, interested parties call me and I'll investigate, and my investigation will really annoy you. I don't have any power myself, but man, I know some annoying things and people. Visitors, be courteous. There are many reasons a landowner does not want you on his property, his or her. They don't know who you are. They don't know you're a family member. Go introduce yourself. Say you're a family member. Don't just, show up and, it's out in the woods and the guy comes out with a shotgun. Who the heck are you? Anyway. What do they have? They have a duty to protect the cemetery. Now, they may not be coming out because of that, but technically that's what they're doing if they come out and they see some unknown person going out in the cemetery. Also, if the landowner is a curmudgeon, be always nice anyway. Do not be combative, and write everything down. Every correspondence, everything you talk to on the phone, what date, time, whatever, because that will come back to bite somebody in the rear. Also, follow the law. If you don't, you're only going to incur unwanted expenses and penalties. Like I said, there's a weird gray area with families, but, you shouldn't be going out in the cemetery and drinking beer and having a party. Now, you can go out and have a picnic, because that's what they did in Victorian times, but pick up your trash. Okay, next. So for more information, you can see how they made me so I didn't look like I had long hair. They fixed the picture up. But anyway, here's my information. And you can also, Phil Hodge is really good at the Department of Archaeology. So is Ben Nance. People call him a lot too. But there's their information, and so if y'all have any questions at any time, I do better by email because I'm only in the office 3 days a week, and I'm not set up to where I can receive calls at home yet, which is annoying, and I need to do that. Anyway, y'all have any questions? Or answers, I'll take answers.
Were you employed, and is it Polk they keep arguing?
Oh, yeah.
Can you tell us about that, or give us an update on that? I followed it, but then since COVID, it's gone or something.
I mean, it didn't happen.
That's right, yeah.
I know that the Polk home, or they wanted him back in Columbia because they thought it might help.
This is President Polk moving his, okay.
But the thing is I don't even think he lived in that house very long either, so they were really kind of stretching.
Is he buried at the Smokehouse?
Yes, he is. And so Sarah, and Sarah's my buddy. Man, when I was at the museum, you would not believe how much stuff that Sarah Polk left to the Tennessee Historical Society. And I mean, gems. Yeah, so she's my favorite person.
Another question you might be able to answer it is, if you had to take a guess, we have some photographs when TVA flooded Danville to create Kentucky Lake in 1943. I have a photograph that shows, and it's identified as them digging up Native American graves that they had found at the time. Where would they have sent those graves?
I do not know,
I think it's a
although,
university somewhere, probably.
yeah, and the Department of Archaeology may have handled them too,
Yeah.
I'm not sure, because
I
I know
often
that
wonder
they.
where they went.
Yeah. Now, that's not always what happened, because back in the old days, and I still remember this, when I would go out with Miss Rudy to archaeology sites in the 1970s, I mean, all those guys like, and I hate to say it, but Malcolm Parker and all those guys at the Parthenon were just basically grave robbers. I remember going to the sites and there was just dirt just shoved everywhere and like skulls were gone out of the, yeah, it was really, really disturbing to a third grader. And yes, and it has stuck with me.
There's a cemetery that I've been working on for a few years trying to clean, and it's Wilson Cemetery. It's over off Cooley Ford down where Patsy and Waylon Brooks live. Anyway, it was originally part of my family's homeland. It sits up on a hill, and it is, for the most part, fenced in. But, so we went out there December 21. We wait till the snakes are down, because it's pretty bad.
Snakes!
But we went down there and we cleared over weeks. We cleared it down to the Vinca. I mean, we cut down trees. We had 2 huge piles and burned the stuff. And Jackie and Donald and Deborah came out there. When you looked across the half acre, maybe, you see dips.
Yep.
Few feet over
Those
dip,
are
few
great.
feet over dip, and then you find a little cluster of rocks. And there, in the cemetery, there's only 10 marked graves.
Yes.
So we started kind of white staking them out.
Yeah,
And
good.
I counted 29 additional little dips in the ground.
Yeah, that is so common.
So I received a grant, and
Ooh, who did you get a grant from?
the Clan McKinnon Society.
Oh,
Because
awesome.
I was a McKinnon, so, anyway, they hand out grants, so they gave me $400, and it was, well, I think it was $1,200. We had a ground penetrating radar
Yeah,
guy
who'd you
come in.
get?
I don't know.
Because I have a whole list of the approved ones, and then he's on my list.
Ashley McKinnon got this guy. He
Okay.
came out, and it was like a little lawnmower, and he had
Yeah.
a little iPad on top of it.
Mhm.
And he went back and forth, and there were only, I think, 5 that he would confirm were
Confirm,
graves.
yeah.
But when looking at the screen, you just see, soil layers, and all of a sudden, you'd see it dip off, and then the ground's all jumbled up, and you go over a few feet more,
Yeah.
there's this line. So you could kind of tell, where they were, but he said, this is probably one, but he wouldn't
Yeah,
tell
and
us
that's,
to confirm.
I mean, GPR is probably the best thing that we have right now, but even then, I mean, it just points out anomalies.
Right.
And the thing is, with kids, with children's graves, I mean, they can be tiny.
Yeah, there were a few kids out there, and those were marked. But what he told me is, he said, the graves, there's some of them are late 1800s. And because it was McKinnon land, we kind of speculate that is where my, Daniel and Christian McKinnon that came over here in the early 1800s were probably buried. More than likely, that's where they were. So that's the reason why we've kind of taken an interest in it. But it grows up
Oh, it
just
grows
like
up.
that.
And the thing is once you do an initial cut, if you keep going out there, it's easier to do. But,
Yeah.
I mean, the thing is you only live so long. One of the things that I'm constantly telling people about is you've got to get young people interested. And one way that I've been going throughout the state and saying, I was like, just remember, high school kids that are on college track have to get volunteer service hours. And this is what I always tell them to do. I said, man, work with your local schools, get some of those people out there.
Well, the Boy Scouts came out
The
one
Boy Scouts
time,
can do that, there's a Boy
and
Scout
they-
law,
And
yes.
they did clean it up.
Yes.
And then, but it just, I mean, you know, it's just trees and
But
brush
here's the
and
deal,
stuff,
when
but,
you get the high school students out there,
uh,
playing a historian.
yeah. But, anyway, it's,
Make people
you know,
come alive.
it's a labor of love. And,
Yes, I know it
you know, we'd love to be able to keep it down to where, you know, it's manageable. But, and Mark, at least was something where the speculations are. Now, we went down there one time and the guy had a deer stand set up.
Yeah,
in
they
it.
can't be
And
hunting
he,
in the
and,
cemetery.
you know,
That's
he said,
illegal.
he was real apologetic and all this stuff about it. He left, he said, I just hope I wasn't over somebody's grave. Well, when the guy was running the radar back and forth, he went, there's one right here. And that's right where that guy had that deer stand. But that's not one that had sunken in. But he had told us, he said, after about 100 years, he said, there is nothing left. He said, there's no bone, no
Yeah,
teeth, no,
generally.
the wood, the
seen
nails. He said,
exceptions.
he said, you don't see anything. So he didn't,
It depends on the soil.
yeah.
Because I know that when we went to the archaeological sites when I was little, I mean, oh God, I'm so embarrassed about this. During the 1970s, the archaeologists were like, oh yeah, here, take some bones home. And so I did have some of those and I had them reinterred, but oh my God, anyway, those, in order to make them stronger, you had to soak them in glue and water, and then they were just as solid as anything. So it just depends on the soil. Like I said, those African-American graves that I saw out there in TVA, I mean, they were there, but they just disintegrated once they picked them up. But I've seen bones come out okay too. I mean, you know, and they go, ancient Rome and stuff, they find them. So it is a soil thing.
Yeah.
But the GPR will, I mean, archaeology has told me, it's like, yeah, they'll spot them thousands of years. You
They
know.
can spot bones?
They'll spot anomalies.
Yeah,
that are
yeah,
probably
that's what was in this, but, I mean, you know, it was all jumbled looking
Yeah,
dirt.
that's why there is one place that they have a 2-week intensive training thing that'll teach you how to do the GPR, but I'm not gonna do it because they won't buy me the GPR units.
It was pretty interesting. It was actually pretty cool to see what.
How about monitoring terms, like where Cassie buried, is that cover goes over? How long will that go?
I don't know, when they had one, there was one of the TVA cemeteries was unidentified, and they knew it was an African-American cemetery, but they didn't know anything else about it, who was buried there or anything. And there was a vault there. And they say that sometimes the vaults will, if they remain airtight, that you can find pretty well preserved stuff in them. In this particular case, because I was thinking it might have been the minister of the church, and when they opened it up, it hadn't been airtight, so.
So after you get a vault and you get a Cassie, you still deteriorate.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's why they only guarantee caskets for like 75 years.
But one thing I always thought about, they talked about when they dug up Abraham Lincoln that time, and we were amazed how he looked like he did when they buried him.
Yeah, and well, I didn't put this in here, but Colonel Shaw, do y'all know that story? Okay. Yeah, from Battle of Nashville. Yeah, just in a nutshell, they thought that somebody had disturbed his grave, and they did, and they thought that they had put a murder victim in his casket. And then when they took him to analyze it, it turned out they had just robbed him, that there was a sword in there, and I can't remember what else was in there, but some of his stuff. And he had been embalmed with arsenic, and that was how they used to embalm you, and his body was so well preserved, they thought it was a recent murder victim, and when they took him out, they realized it was Colonel Shaw.
Oh, wow.
Died in 1864 up on Shies Hill.
What did they, I'm just trying to remember, what did they have to reinter Abraham Lincoln? They brought him out for some reason, move him, or?
I don't remember.
It was, I don't remember, there's some reason, like,
I wish I knew about
30 or
everything.
40 years later, they had to, they moved you to, oh, the Lincoln Memorial.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
That's
yeah,
why they
okay,
moved
yeah, that
Memorial,
makes
yeah.
sense.
Well,
And then they were amazed, he looked like he'd just been buried, you know.
I'm intrigued by what you talked about Wayne County and how their county, did you say their government's involved?
James Dixon, I'll give
Taking
you his
care of
number,
all
you
their
can call
cemeteries?
him.
Wow,
Oh, that would be great.
that would be wonderful.
Yeah.
Do they?
I've got his
supply
number right
budget?
here in my phone.
And do they
Would you
supply
like it?
budget, do they supply budget money to the county that, really?
And it took him a long time to do that. He had to, you know, it's like he had to get in good with the county officials and stuff. And then when they got new county officials, those people had to get on board, and
That's amazing.
it's just, it doesn't end, man. It
How
just
many
doesn't.
cemeteries in Wayne County?
Let's see. You know what, I can, if you will bring up, yeah.
This is my laptop.
When would they
There's no
have time to
internet
do their other
No,
job?
no, it's on here.
Full-time
Is
job
it,
there.
yeah, is it just like 3 or 4 guys that are
Yeah,
specific?
we do it, yeah.
All right, if you go to my thingamajig, my thumb drive. Okay, it says Anna, yes, that's it. Bring up Tennessee Cemetery Database, and you can see I just updated it today. All right, now see all the counties are along the bottom, so Wayne is a W, so just go until you find, I'm glad you're doing this instead of me, so. So just keep doing those pluses, yeah. Wait, no, that's not what I did.
Go back to your left, by the F, by the F.
What?
No, no,
Oh, do your arrows.
yeah.
Yeah, and you'll eventually get to
No, that's
the,
just in the sheet.
no, I know, but the arrows,
here,
these
this
ones,
one.
yeah.
Yeah, there you go. There you go.
There we go.
Okay, let's go all the way to Wayne County.
Come
95 counties.
on. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, there are a lot of
Towards the end of the alphabet.
Of course.
There we
Okay,
go.
there's Wayne County, so go click on that one.
And I'm not real, oh gosh.
There are, and I can't see the numbers over here
I
on the
can't,
screen.
290. Zion, number 2 is 290. Or 290.
290.
Well, I don't know how many
What's
lines you got
Houston
at the
County
top.
got?
Go to Houston County, see what they, what they got.
I've got 240 for Houston right now.
236.
Cemeteries?
Yeah. But you know, I think it's,
You've got
there's
more
another
than
little
you-
cemetery down there by
Oh, wow.
Wilson. That's,
I may
we
even
got
have
one
more if I
grave
actually go
that
through what I
we've
need to do.
walked around and have no idea. Coleman,
Oh, yeah, you're just walking on like dead people.
you don't know. Did we-
I always used to say, that's Tennessee's just one giant cemetery.
It's world smoked up.
And you got 204.
We have an abandoned cemetery on our farm, the Hatfield Cemetery. The Hatfields, who my grandfather Ride bought the farm from in 1928. And I can remember as a little boy, when you drive by it on the state highway. Okay, I can remember a little wood fence ran in the gate, but eventually all that's gone.
Yeah.
And now it's just woods. And maybe the Boy Scouts come in 10, 15 years ago, cleaned it up a couple times, but that's,
Well, and that's one of the things, like with my family cemetery, my Sills Cemetery in North Carolina, I mean, they had a huge plantation, but, you know, you get this idea, and I've had people think, oh, yes, there's 3 markers there, so there are 3 graves. But, yeah, it's not the way it works. But in that particular cemetery, and knowing how much, you know, I guess money they had at one time, I mean, even the patriarch's grave, I mean, all their graves are sunken. And so they just buried them either in wooden coffins or in a shroud. And they just have like, you know, non-assuming headstones. They're not, you know, they weren't like going out to prove they were anybody. So you don't ever know what causes people to put what kind of markers they have and why they don't have certain caskets, or you just don't know, man.
this is a good example of one just being gone, man.
Yeah.
It's just gone.
Yeah.
It's part of the woods, yeah.
But he's still there.
Yes, you're right.
See, that's the thing. I always try to, because I've even been going through these, and it says, oh, and that cemetery is no longer there. I'm like, oh, wow, well, do you have a paper that says it was relocated? Because it's still there.
Yeah.
And Tennessee recognizes it as still there until it's actually
Not-
legally not there.
What about pauper cemeteries?
As a matter of fact, oh my gosh, they're doing a project down in, oh my God, I remembered this, because, anyway, it's in West Tennessee. And they've actually got a whole group that are working on the pauper cemeteries. The state cemetery, the Central State Hospital, there's a group that's trying to get a sign put up there and things like that, but, you know,
Does
I
that
mean,
fall under the same rules that?
yeah, everything. It's all the same rules, man. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, man. You can't move a grave without.
Have these people not seen the movie Poltergeist?
This is what I always say to people at the end when they're not listening to me. I say, and after all, we've all seen
Because that's the whole
Poltergeist.
premise. They move the headstones and not the graves.
Yep, cemetery's there. You can move all the headstones you want, but that cemetery's still there. And if somebody comes in and sees that cemetery is there and you've moved the headstones, you can be in trouble.
So look back eons. We're probably walking on somebody's grave right now, some Native American or some
Oh,
story
absolutely.
guy. You know, I mean, they gotta be covered everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. And this is why, and this is, it's so weird that I have this job, because at a personal level, I have personal ideas about what I feel about cemeteries and burials and things like that. But in my job, I'm concerned with trying to help people navigate what the laws are right now. I mean, I'm gonna be cremated, for God's sake. I don't wanna be buried.
Yeah, but you know what, from a genealogical standpoint, you still need to have that headstone. You need to be in a cemetery someplace, or nobody's gonna find you.
Yeah, nobody,
You know,
nobody needs to
I
find
mean,
me.
I've been all over the world stomping through cemeteries,
Oh.
looking for, you know, this headstone or this great person and all this. And in Scotland, the headstones there will almost list, you know,
Oh, yeah.
so-and-so, son of, daughter of, you know, it'll have your family history on their headstone. So, you know, just trying to find.
But I bet you there are a lot of people in Scotland that are just put in the ground.
Well, yeah. I mean, there was some, no telling what extends to that, but still, it's a wealth of knowledge.
Well, no, it
When
is. I mean,
you-
that's
when
what,
you
so
do find
that is
that.
one of the valuable things about cemetery headstones. And that's
Yeah,
why I always
absolutely.
tell people, you know, if you've got the gumption and the time to do it, it's like, locate those graves, like you say, you can even GPS them so that they never disappear. I mean, you always have the GPS coordinate.
Well, now, that's what this guy, when
Yeah.
he did the radar, he
Yes.
GPS'd them, so.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah.
and that way you can make a cemetery map, actually. But the thing is those headstones have all that information on there, and I've seen them, some of them, they're in such bad shape, and people are like, well, I don't know what to do. I was like, well, what you need to do is you need to go out there and record the information. You know, go out there with somebody, you don't have to touch the tombstone at all. You use, I don't have it in here, but I have a high lumen light, and you just flash it, and you can, you know, one person can write and the other person can show all the words, and you don't even have to touch the tombstone, you can get all the information off. But I'm always encouraging people to do that, because every day that they stay out there and you haven't done that, they're deteriorating whether you can see it or not. That's one of the things Dan Pomeroy taught us at the Tennessee State Museum when we got there. He said, you know, we have these great artifacts and everything, but what you have to understand as a curator is all you're doing is prolonging the inevitable. All this stuff is going to be dust someday. It just matters if it's 5,000 years or 5 years.
Can you address the fact that people change the name of the cemetery? If the Jones family lives here and the next 50 years, it's the Smith family cemetery.
Okay, so you will notice if you look through my stuff that I collect cemetery names. And the reason being is because I will get somebody that used to call it a certain name. If I don't have that name in there, I'll never find where they're talking about unless I have to spend a lot of time going, well, where is it, blah, 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 blah. So I collect names.
Well, we have a map for you from our county.
That I will take.
30-something marked on the
Yeah,
county.
I will think that immediately, huh?
And we also have a page that the names have
Oh,
changed. of
okay,
cemeteries.
yes, that's perfect.
And there's a map number.
That's perfect. That's exactly perfect.
Okay,
That's our research that continues.
Yeah, I'll be working on this tomorrow, I can guarantee you.
Well, it's interesting because you've got, one of the cemeteries here is Courthouse Square,
Yeah.
and it shows, if you look on Find a Grave, there's one person buried at Courthouse Square. It would be Francis Green. He's not buried there.
Ah, well,
He was a Medal of Honor recipient,
yeah.
and so the only one in the county, and so there's
We have a
marker.
monument there.
Well, now, and here's the thing, when it comes to monuments without burials, that puts it in a different department. But I
It's
just,
not a, it's not a cemetery. He's not buried.
but yeah, I mean, all you have to do is just report this guy's not really there and I'll fix him out. I don't know if I'll remember by the time I do something.
Is it noted in the list?
But I keep ongoing notes of cemeteries so that they have histories of, you know, what people thought was there, what's not there when people found out or whatever, because those things are important to the history of the cemetery. I always point out, like with my family, we had all these family myths, and I busted a bunch of them, and my mom was upset. But sometimes the lore that comes with stuff, and why people say that someone is buried somewhere, or why they say, like in my family, that my ancestor was the person that shot Stonewall Jackson, which is not true. But that happened in the county, and it circulated there. So it was like, why did that story come about? Those are the kind of things that are interesting. The whole county knew it was true, even though it wasn't true. Who came up with it? Why did it rise up? And why did it point to my family? You know? But I found out it was hard. I was, yeah.
Are there any other questions for the speaker?
I can talk forever, so. Okay. I appreciate y'all so much having me out here. I love y'all down.
Thank you.
I do. I would rather be.
Braves that are about the front.
I like I like
Them out there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that an Indian grave?
Well, as far as I know, it was